Yeah, so I'm Kate Kenworthy and I'm here from the Banking Ombudsman Scheme.
And kia ora from me, I'm Louise Peters from the Insurance and Financial Services Ombudsman Scheme.
And yeah, thank you to the Commission for having us here today and for all of you lenders for attending. We thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk to you about how you as lenders can handle complaints and to provide some tips on responding to them. You'll see I'm referring to some notes to make sure I don't miss anything important, so apologies. But we'll start by sharing some information about the Financial Markets Authority and a report that they recently released into consumer experience with the financial sector, because it revealed some really interesting statistics, including that of those surveyed, only 5% had made a complaint, and slightly more, 7% said they would like to have made a complaint but didn't. Of those asked, a third said they didn't complain because they didn't think there was any point. It wasn't going to change anything for them. And I guess more concerningly, another third said they didn't complain because they didn't know how. So yeah, big stats we should be quite worried about, right?
Yeah, we think they are. If nothing else, studies show that over 70% of happy customers tell more than 6 people about their positive experience. But more importantly, over 90% of dissatisfied customers simply take their business elsewhere and engage in negative word of mouth. So that means you may never know about the most dissatisfied people using your service. So this is called complaints are a gift, which might sound like a bit of an oxymoron, but we believe complaints give you the opportunity to re-engage with your clients, protect your reputation, identify areas of weakness and improve your service, address minor issues before they become full-blown complaints, or worse still, escalate to your dispute resolution scheme, and let you build a positive relationship with your client. So in the words of Bill Gates, we all need people who give us feedback. That's actually how we improve. So nice to say, but how do you approach a complaint as if it's a gift?
Yeah, because it does feel like an oxymoron, and it might seem a bit Pollyanna to say that a complaint is a gift, because receiving a complaint is no fun. None of you got into the business of what you do to make people upset or to receive complaints. But unfortunately, no matter how good your staff are or how good your service is, you will receive complaints. It's just reality. We're all human, mistakes happen and disagreements occur. And it's how you deal with them that's really matters. And it's so cliched, but Alfie Martin was right. It's the putting right that counts. So first things first, deal with the big issue. Identify a complaint. It seems so simple, but people won't call up and necessarily say or contact you and say, I've got a complaint about a service. It's very rare that somebody will use that golden word. So you need to know how to identify a complaint. And so a complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction made to you where a response or a resolution is explicitly or implicitly expected. So keep that in mind and train your staff on identifying complaints and being mindful or aware of when a complaint is being raised. And then ensure that they are recording them, no matter how minor or how trivial they seem. Have a system that records them, and that's going to be your gold in terms of using that information to identify any process issues or staff development. Yeah, so you've identified the complaint, you've put it in your system. How do you actually handle the complaint itself?
Well, we always say the key is to train and empower your frontline staff to resolve complaints. So your best opportunity to resolve a complaint is almost always when it's first made. And my apologies if we're teaching you how to suck eggs here, but it is really important that your frontline staff have the time, the skill set and the power or the authority to resolve complaints when they first arrive. So also really important that any responses that your clients are getting from frontline staff are accurate and they're comprehensive. And also important to make sure those staff don't have KPIs that indirectly stop them from doing that by, for example, cutting conversations short because they've only got a set amount of time that a phone call can take. The important thing is clients want to feel that they've been heard. They're looking for an empathetic response and a clear explanation of how something works or what's happened, and that may be all that's required. In fact, probably 90% or more of your complaints are being dealt with at that level, or not going any further than that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is why it's really important for them to record them. But your frontline staff aren't going to be able to resolve all complaints. It's just reality, and it's not necessarily a reflection of poor staff handling of the matter. So you need to have a really good escalation process, a clear escalation process for those frontline staff to follow, and to follow it quickly. If it becomes really apparent they're not going to be able to resolve it, have them put into a process where it's escalated to somebody who can try and resolve it for them, and be clear with the customer that you're doing that, and tell them that you belong to a dispute resolution scheme. Be upfront about that, because that's likely to give them confidence that you'll know what you're doing and that you're going to follow a good process in listening and trying to resolve their concerns. You are now legally obliged to give your client contact details for your dispute resolution scheme if a complaint remains unresolved for longer than 2 days. And it's also a requirement of belonging to one of our schemes. So if the complaint has been escalated to you, your frontline staff couldn't resolve it, you really need to understand what has gone wrong, right?
Absolutely. And we're at the point now where you're in your escalated process and a new person is dealing with the complaint. So it's absolutely key that they take the time to really find out what's happened. And that's usually will involve talking to the client when they complain so they can properly understand exactly what they're complaining about. You can't really just rely on what has been reported up to you there, and you can't resolve something that you don't understand. So we are very firmly of the view that you should be contacting them direct, ideally by phone, asking them open-ended questions to properly understand what they think has gone wrong, to understand the impact it's had on them and how they'd like it resolved. And I know from personal experience that you will get very articulate people who write very articulate emails explaining their complaint, but when you talk to them, it's a yes, but actually this is the thing that I'm really annoyed about, and it's not even in the written piece, or it's a passing comment, so you would easily have missed it. And you'd be surprised the number of complaints that actually escalate through to dispute resolution schemes when nobody's actually spoken to the client is quite astonishing. And oftentimes it's really clear that if they'd had the conversation earlier on, it probably wouldn't have got to there. The other thing that's important is if they've nominated a representative like a financial mentor, then you're dealing with that representative generally. There will be times where you might need to speak with the client directly because they're the one with the information. If that's the case, then you need to be explaining that's what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that coming out of not having that phone call or communicating directly can come out of a little bit of a fear that somebody's already angry or upset about something and you just want to respond and get it done with. But don't be scared of, I guess, of communicating with somebody directly and asking them, what they want, because I think that's also a part of it. There is this fear that if you ask, they're going to want something outrageous that you can't possibly deliver on. But you're not going to know if you don't ask, and don't make assumptions. You'll often be quite surprised. Sometimes people just want an apology or an acknowledgement that something's gone wrong. But if not, and they are after something that you don't think you're going to be able to deliver on, it's helpful to set expectations and just say that up front. I'm sorry, but that's actually not something we can do for you. But this is what we can do. Set expectations and parameters And I think, you'll often be surprised that that is enough to soften some people's kind of tension over a complaint.
Okay, so you've listened, you've identified what they want, and now you can actually investigate the complaint. So what does an investigation look like?
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to make sure I read my notes, because this is very important. It needs to be impartial and objective. And again, we don't want to teach you to suck eggs. I'm sure you're all doing this, but it is that approaching a complaint with an open mind, and not getting caught in assumptions or conjecture, because we often see complaints where the inclination is to say that can't possibly have happened. Our staff would never do that. We train them not to do that. We have these policies, or we follow the law. And then we dig a little bit further and we get, we sometimes call them the smoking guns. You'll find out something has gone wrong. It's really important then to consider all information and facts. And when you're looking at that information, considering whether there are gaps and what you need to do to fill those gaps, what other information you might need to seek. That might involve talking directly, as Louise said, to the representative or the client, or perhaps to a staff member. That will be really helpful if it's about something that's happened in person or over the phone, or a he said, she said situation. If you do that, it's really helpful to do that sooner rather than later, because memories are notoriously fallible and they will deteriorate further over time. But that can be really helpful information.
And it's important that the investigation is timely, so you're getting onto it, but investigating itself can take time. So you may need to speak to people, you may need to get documentation, you may need to find third parties who know something, etc. All of that, depending on the type of complaint, can take a while. Generally, clients are okay with that if they know that you're actually taking it seriously and you're properly looking at it and they haven't been forgotten. But they need to understand that that's what is happening, that you're not just faffing around in the office, ignoring them. So keep them updated about what's happening. If you need to find out more information before you can respond, let them know. Give them a time frame for your response. We find all the time we will set a time frame, and then for some reason you haven't got what you need, and you actually just can't meet that time frame, reset the time frame and let them know. Don't wait for them to follow up with you and say, you said you'd get back to me last Wednesday and it's now next Friday, because this is where you get complaints about the complaints process. So it's important to be transparent, and it's important that your clients know what you're doing and that you're doing a proper job.
And most of the time, if people will be understanding, if you're keeping them updated, that you're looking into it, it's just taken a little bit longer. But yeah, as Louise said, a key is be proactive about that. Don't wait until you've missed a deadline and they're following up with you. Another really helpful tip we find with complaint processes that work really well are ones where there's a really clear step-by-step process, and sometimes printed out on a flowchart, and you share that with the client, and they can see what's happening. Okay, we're in the information gathering stage. They know what that means and what's going to happen next. And you can keep referring back to it. I'm sorry, we're still trying to gather some information. We're at this stage, but your complaint is progressing. The client knows what to expect. And yeah, we do get complaints about complaints processes and things going wrong, and having a really clear structure for the process and communicating with them well is going to prevent a lot of those complaints.
I think one of the things we see is people not knowing when the end is coming, like what is the end point here? Are we there yet? So if you can say, well, we're at step 3, there's one more to go, or if at the end of this it's not resolved, then you'll be referred to the dispute resolution scheme. It's much clearer for everybody. Yeah,
people feel they're not being forgotten. It's an important complaint. So you've investigated the complaint, you've considered all the information, and you've made your findings. how should you communicate that to the client?
Well, in an investigation, you obviously have to tell the client what you found. Generally speaking, if you've discovered that there's a fault in your process or your system or something went wrong, explain what went wrong and give the client sufficient information to evaluate what happened and to decide what to do next. Don't be afraid to apologise if you found you got something wrong. You'd be absolutely surprised how often that will resolve a complaint. It doesn't mean you're admitting liability. It doesn't mean you're on the hook for anything. Even if something did go wrong and a complaint ends up here, where the remedy doesn't necessarily mean something terrible is going to happen. It's going to be proportionate to what's actually happened. And then explain how you're proposing to put things right. Or in some cases, you might have a number of options that you can put to your client and say, well, we could do this, or we could do this, we could do that. And that's quite a nice conversation to be having about what works for them.
Yeah. And a key with that is communicate the decision clearly, preferably in writing, unless it's a very straightforward issue and your client's happy to talk by phone. And that the reason we say that is, you know, a lot of people have not made a complaint before and they need information to digest and to know what that means, what their next steps are and what their options are. And they can refer back to it. You can refer back to it when you're in further discussions with them. In that process and in that communication, remember to give them the opportunity to respond. You might have missed something, you might have misunderstood something. You might have got a fact wrong, or you might have given some options and they want to discuss them. So remain open to trying to negotiate an outcome, because agreed outcomes are far preferable to an imposed outcome. And if you're satisfied you haven't done anything wrong, also keep an open mind to whether there's still something you can do that would resolve the complaint for the person. And it might be simply acknowledging that it was quite a grey area or it was a difficult situation for the client. And that might just look like a really good acknowledgement. In some cases, it might be a very small financial kind of token or compensation as a gesture of goodwill. It doesn't, as Louise indicated, it doesn't need to be an admission of fault if you're doing something like that. Referring to my notes again, because this is another key part. Call first if you can. Sometimes these processes can take a while, and for somebody who's not familiar with a complaints process to get a decision letter or some kind of communication in writing can be a bit overwhelming. So a quick phone call can go a really long way to maintaining a good relationship with them. You can just give them a very quick summary of where you're at, what your findings are, and what their options are. Or, you know, you now have the opportunity to come back to us by an XYZ date with your thoughts on it. But don't put them on the spot in a phone call necessarily. And yeah, another key thing, follow up if you don't hear back. Don't assume that no news is good news. Some people will just be a bit overwhelmed by a process and not know how to respond, or want to share some frustration but don't think they've got new information to provide. And yeah, you don't want people to be voting with their feet simply because they didn't like the response and you never called them back or you never contacted them again. So yeah, we do appreciate it's a lot of work to try and resolve a complaint. Trying to remember again why complaint is a gift.
Well, I think we're looping back to the beginning now, which at the beginning Kate said no one wants to get complaints. Apart from the reputational issues, they're a drain on your staff time, which is a cost of the business, and they cost you to put them right. Not to forget, you pay a fee if a complaint comes to a scheme. So the key reason we say complaints are gifts is that they allow you to prevent future complaints, but only if you use them to learn what you can to stop getting others. So even if the complaint has no merit, it still took some effort to deal with. It's still worth asking whether there's anything you can do to stop another complaint like it. Was the client just confused about how something worked, for example, how a fee applied? And if that's the case, can you update your website, provide a bit more information, training to your frontline staff, etc. But, again, not wanting to teach you how to suck eggs here. That you're looking obviously for trends. It might be you're looking for, does a particular staff member get more complaints than others? Do they need some more training on something? Is there a particular process that is generating a lot of queries or just general dissatisfaction? Is there something that you can do to fix it, clarify it, make it less cumbersome? The options are endless in terms of fixing it. But those are the things that you're really looking at. How do I stop it happening again? So most of it's going to be trends, and some of them will be just big, horrible, ugly one-off complaints that really require you to say, whoa, we need to make sure that didn't happen again. And one is enough for you to get to that point.
And when it is trends, I guess to identify those successfully, and we're looping back again because this is a really important point, record all complaints, no matter how trivial or minor they are, and record the outcome, because that's how you are going to see the trends, provided you then use that information. So think about having somebody who has responsibility for that information and regularly reviewing it, so that they can feed back to relevant teams about changes that should be implemented. And that can be really helpful, because you might be able to go back and say, well, we saw this trend, we suggested this change, we've now seen a drop in complaints in that area, and that might be what you need to refer to if the changes you're suggesting are going to cost money or resources and time. So I think that's us. Thanks for your time.